The discovery of America had enormous impact on Europe, okay? And one of the main impacts of the discovery of America was that Europe started to be able to extract resources from the Americas that made Europe wealthy, right? So if you remember, I said before that that the population, the economy of this system was subsistence, meaning they needed everybody to produce enough for everybody to live, right? It was also stagnant. The population of Europe was stagnant really throughout the Middle Ages, and the reason why was because they couldn't grow enough food for the population to grow. What would happen would be they'd have really good crops for a couple of years, and the population would start to grow, and then they'd have bad crops, and there'd be a famine, and people would die off, right? So the population remained relatively stagnant over 1,000 years, right? But after America was discovered, they introduced new crops from the Americas, like the potato, right? You wouldn't think of potatoes as being very sexy in terms of world history, right? But because of the introduction of the potato, the European population started to grow, right? And so there's going to be an increase in population in Europe as the result of the discovery of America. Beyond that, there's going to be other resources, like, for example, silver, that the Spanish are able to extract silver from Mexico. That's why there were so many miners in Mexico, right? They were able to extract silver from Mexico and Peru, and that made the Spanish Empire very rich. And then later, the British and the French and the Dutch will get in on that as well, right? And so eventually what ends up happening is that Europeans have a very interesting cash flow problem. And the problem is they have more cash than they know what to do with. And it'll start off with people, the people who are, say, plantation owners in America are going to go, they didn't go to America because they wanted to live in America. They wanted to live in Europe, right? And they wanted to live high in Europe, okay? And so what happens is that they go to the Americas, they make lots of money, they go back to Europe, they buy out the old aristocracy, and then they buy their places to live, and they buy their manors, and they spend money buying positions at court, and they spend money buying art and things throughout Europe, right? And once they've done that, they own essentially everything, and they still have more money than they know what to do with. And so eventually what they do is they start to invest that money in technology. There will be a creation of machines that will make production more more productive, right? Okay, manufacturing will be more productive. And there's a certain machine that does that. Does anybody want to guess what that is? It's the steam engine.
No.
Steam engine. You guys have heard of the steam engine?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So the steam engine, what the steam engine does is it revolutionizes a couple of different things. On the one hand, we have what's called the transportation revolution. And what that means is that essentially the speed of the world increases from about 3 miles per hour to a screaming 25 miles per hour, right? And you're gonna say, well, 25 miles per hour is not very fast. But you guys have many of you have sat on the freeway, on the 405 freeway in LA, and you know that 25 miles an hour is fast, right? So, but the main thing, if you think about it in terms of numbers, right, is that 25 miles per hour is a little over 8 times faster than 3 miles per hour, which is the speed of the world before the transportation revolution. I'm talking about steam engines, I'm talking about steam trains and steam boats, right? Okay, and so if it's 8 times faster, what that really does is it makes the world 8 times smaller, doesn't it? That essentially the world is 8 times smaller than it was before. Okay, and and if you think about, for example, in terms of American history, many of you guys have heard of Lewis and Clark. Tell me about Lewis and Clark. They actually went to the West Coast, right?
Yeah,
Okay,
Yeah, it was
um,
the Lewis and Clark expedition, right?
yeah.
right. The Lewis and Clark expedition. They went from Pittsburgh to the West Coast of the United States, and then they ended their um, expedition in uh, in Louisville, Kentucky, right? So how long did it take for them to go from Pittsburgh to the West Coast and back to Louisville? It was 18 months. 18 months, right? Okay, so that was in 1803, and that was before the introduction of the steam engine. Okay, but if we go to 1865, there's the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad, and now it's possible to go from the East Coast to the West Coast in 2 weeks. You see what happens? And it's because of that that Americans were able to subdue the North American continent. If you think about when Jefferson bought Louisiana, he thought that it would take 1,000 years to settle that territory. And yet the whole thing was settled within a century, right? And it's because of the transportation revolution. So that has an enormous influence on world history, on American history, okay?